In Joshua chapter 13, they're dividing up the land for the inheritance for all the different tribes. But as you may recall from other Old Testament sections, there was one group of people that didn't receive any land, and that was the Levites. The Levites didn't receive any land. They were the church workers. Their inheritance, it says in Joshua chapter 13, is, well, the offerings that all the other people would bring to the tabernacle. They would use those offerings to feed their families, to care for themselves, give everything they need, but they would not receive any land. And so it was a little risky to be a Levite. Of course, you were born into being a Levite. There was nothing you could really do about it. But it was risky in a way that the other tribes didn't have to carry that risk. They got land that they could plant vegetables on, and that they could farm, and they could do whatever they wanted with. They could raise animals on it. But the Levites didn't. In a sense, they had to rely on people. They had to rely on other people loving God and keeping their promises. And that's what the offerings were. It was God's people coming to the tabernacle. They were coming there because they loved God, and they had made promises that they were going to give their offerings to the Lord, and they were going to sacrifice, and sacrificing is never easy, and the Levites would have to rely on that happening on a consistent basis, which was probably kind of risky. And you might know that if you've ever had to rely on people keeping their promises in order for things to go well. If the people in your life are anything like the people in everybody else's life, then you know that people aren't always reliable. People don't always keep their promises. People don't always think of others before they think of themselves. And it's not just the other people, of course, that can show up in our own hearts too. And so it would have been really, really risky for the Levites to be a Levite, to have to rely on people. And of course, people, that's just one of the many things that we don't have complete control over as we go through life. We don't have control over the weather. We don't have control over the electric grid. We don't have control over the supply chain. We don't have control over health. We don't have control over sometimes death. There are a lot of things that make us feel like we have very little control because we don't have control over them. And that can make us feel vulnerable, as I'm sure the Levites did. And maybe that's one of the reasons why God repeats again and again throughout the book of Joshua, throughout the Old Testament, this truth that they would receive their inheritance. Like he reminds them that this is going to be your inheritance, and not from the people, but this is going to be your inheritance from the Lord. That the Lord was going to be the one who was going to be providing through people. Even weak people, even faithless people, even people who are bringing their offerings for all the wrong reasons. God was going to be the one who was going to make sure that the Levites had everything that they needed. And there's an interesting, I guess, little nugget of truth that we get to observe in the fact that God repeats multiple times for the Levites this promise that they were going to receive their inheritance from the Lord through the people. He says it again and again and again. The little nugget of truth is this: every time he says it, the Levites are still there. In other words, all the Levites, up until that point, they have received everything that they have needed in order to live, even though there are so many things they did not have control over. There are a lot of things that you don't have control over in your life, many things. There are very few things, in fact, that we do have complete control over. And yet here you are. God has cared for you. He has gotten you this far. And he has given you an assurance that he will always give you everything that you need. That assurance is the gift of his Son, the offering that God himself made, the sacrifice that God himself gave, the one where God gave everything he had, all of his life, all of his existence, every breath, to be there for you. He did that then. He won't fail to do it today. Rest well tonight, my friends.